Welcome to LitLunch Online. Today I'm going to be talking to Shun. Shun was born in Reykjavik in 1962. A poet, novelist and playwright, he's received numerous literary awards, including the Nordic Council's Literature Prize for The Blue Fox, while From the Mouth of the Whale was shortlisted for the International Impact Dublin Literary Award and the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize. His novel Moonstone, The Boy Who Never Was, won several Icelandic literature prizes. His last published work was Codex 1962. His novels have been published into 35 languages. Shun has also published 9 poetry collections, written 4 opera librettos and lyrics for various artists, including Björk. In 2001, he was nominated for an Oscar for his lyrics in the film Dancer in the Dark. We're here to talk about his latest novel, Red Milk, translated by Victoria Cribb and published in English today. So Gunnar Kampen grows up in Iceland during the Second World War in a household fiercely opposed to Hitler and Nazism. At 19, he seems set for conventional, dutiful life. And yet in the spring of 1958, he founds an anti-Semitic nationalist party, a cause that will take him on a clandestine mission to England, from which he never returns. Welcome, Shun.
Thank you, Lucy.
So, what inspired Red Milk and why now?
Well, I think the time is right. We see the uprising of far-right movements all over the world, and that's what we've been experiencing, let's say, over the last 10, 15 years. And unfortunately, as I was working on the book, it just grew more and more, and it even reached the shores of our small island in the north. So I really felt the urgency of the story and the subject matter. I felt it needed my attention. And then on the other hand, I had already dealt with the Nazi legacy in 2 of my earlier novels. But this time I really wanted to, let's say, look at it almost clinically. In the other books, there is an ironic stance towards the, let's say, strangeness of the ideology, the silliness of where it could take people, and then I thought I need to tackle this in a purely serious manner. And while I was researching Codex 1962, I looked into the history of the Nazi movement in Iceland. And one of the surprises for me when I was doing that research was to discover that there had been a small neo-Nazi group in Iceland around 1960. It was a very little published story. It had been a footnote in the only non-fiction book about Nazism in Iceland, and there it was brushed off as minor incidents, a small group of almost teenagers who didn't know any better, and they were laughed off, really. But when I started looking into it, I realized there was a story there to tell, and the main character in that story was the group's banal leader, Gunnar Kampen. So, why do you choose a subject matter for your book? I mean, it comes to you, and there are little bits that that smell interesting, to the writer's brain, and all of a sudden you're on a track, and then the times work on you, and you realize, okay, this is really a story that needs to be told.
And your story begins with the death of your protagonist, Gunnar Kampen, in Cheltenham Spa. Why did you choose to begin with his end and have England as your setting?
Well, England was the obvious setting for his last mission, because he is on his way to a meeting that proved to be the foundational meeting of the neo-Nazis at that time. I mean, I don't know if we should say that we should be glad that people don't know the history of neo-Nazism too well, you know, but it's there. And in the Cotswolds in August of 1962, all these, all the Führers, all the key people of the emerging neo-Nazi movement, they gathered there, and they came together in what is called the Cotswold Declaration, which is the foundational document for neo-Nazism as we know it today. So it was really the birthplace of the movement and the international organization of that movement. So history chose the setting for the beginning of the novel. And I wanted to start with our character as close to his goal as possible. He doesn't make it there, and we will discover at the end where he is really going, but he doesn't make it there. On a more cynical note, I can say that if you're going to write about a neo-Nazi in the way I write about Gunnar Kampen in the book, that is without judgment, you know, it is more like I said earlier, a clinical look into what makes a person like this come into being. The cynical stance would be to say that it was easier for the writer, and it's easier on the reader to read about a dead neo-Nazi than a living one. So, yeah.
Yeah, very true, very true. But it's a courageous, in terms of writing, it's courageous to begin with an ending. But yes, I can see your point. And in the course of the story, you also mentioned George Lincoln Rockwell, party leader of the post-war American Nazi Party, and his marriage to Icelandic beauty, Thora Helgrimsson. Can you say a little bit more about him and his connection to Iceland and why you wanted him in your story?
So the story of Gunnar Kampen, the story of this small cell of neo-Nazis in Iceland in the early 60s, late 50s, was only possible because of George Lincoln Rockwell. He came to Iceland to serve on the American military base in Keflavik. He was serving there, I think, in the what would you call it, like, you know, the information department or whatever, because he was a cartoonist, and he I think he was a trained printer, so he came there in that capacity. And he met Thora, the love of his life, here. She was of a very fine Icelandic stock, known beauty, but also a fallen woman because he had had a child out of wedlock. And so her family was ready to accept her engagement to this charming American man who seemed to be cultured and interested in the Germanic heritage. So that was one of the things that made him attractive to the fine family of Thora. So this founder of the American neo-Nazi movement, and thereby also one of the founders of the neo-Nazi, the global neo-Nazi movement, the fact that he was in Iceland and that a young man who was already being nudged in this direction could find a supporter in such a big figure in the story of neo-Nazism, you know, I mean, it was there. So much of this book is just based on information and historical fact that were just there, ready for taking and putting into a book. So, you know, this is one of the strange things about Iceland. You know, we are this tiny island at the edge of the civilized world, as I like to say. We are always north of war. We are always just outside the big historical events of the world. And at the same time, we somehow always find true representatives of things going on in the big world on our soil, you can say.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that's the crazy thing. And in this case, obviously, with the Nazi, or with the original Nazi movement's obsession with Iceland and everything Germanic and Nordic, and this idea of Iceland as the perfect Aryan Nordic Arcadia, you know, it has drawn people with unsavory ideas to our shores. And in this case, George Lincoln Rockwell came here. He was very happy to be sent to Iceland because he was already nurturing these ideas. But he said that once here, his ideas about the grandeur of the Nordic race and everything was confirmed by everyone he met here. You know, and he met people through Thora and Thora's family. He met influential men who had been members of the original Nazi party in Iceland, you know. So he was here. My young protagonist is influenced by him. He seeks support from him, you know, and license to do what he's doing.
And I was going to ask, you often weave folk tales and myth into your fiction, but in Red Milk, you decided to refrain from engaging in the Nordic pantheon, the symbols or the heroic deeds and words of the characters from Icelandic sagas. Why did you choose to do that?
I think there are two reasons. The main reason is that, I mean, so much of the writing this book was about restraining myself, about refraining from doing things. And I realized early on in the writing that whenever I strayed into the Nordic mythology or the sagas and the ideas about the heroic, merciless, death celebrating heroes of the epics and the epics and the folklore of this culture, then I had given into the pathos that informs so much of the Nazi way of thinking, and it went against this attempt to look at him clinically. You know, I tried very much in the book not to give any easy answers. So that was one of the easy answers that I could have given, you know, by showing a young man's fascination with these known symbols and elements. I wanted to show all the other things that were nudging him towards this. I think there may be 2 or 3 lines that refer to the blood and soil ideology. It is in his letter to his friend when he is working on the Westman Islands. And there he says something like, here people till the seas like a farmer tills his earth. And, you know, they have this special connection and all of that stuff. But in my other books, I have really reveled in going into the myths and in recreating them and all of that. But in this case, I couldn't go into the pathos. of the neo-Nazi mind.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that he's banal. I mean, he's mocked and called the Icelandic Führer in a newspaper report, but other than that, he's an ordinary, uninspiring, ineffectual man. And why did you want such a banal character?
Well, one of the things that fascinated me about the let's say the character that is the historical character that is behind my character, and my character is very much based on. I was really fascinated by the fact that he was more or less invisible in Reykjavik at the time he was like trying to found this Nazi movement. Of course, he called it a movement, even though there was just 30 of them sitting in a room, you know, wondering why they were there instead of somewhere chasing girls and listening to rock and roll, and you know, and doing things that young men should be doing. He was a very banal man. He was an insignificant figure in Icelandic society, and that is the smoldering fire. You know, that he is the smoldering fire. He's exactly the kind of man who is fueling the neo-Nazi movements all over the world, and he's fueling it by not shouting in the streets, you know, by not shaving his head off and tattooing a swastika on his forehead, you know. He's the middle manager somewhere, you know. And it's very interesting interesting what I saw in Swedish studies about the neo-Nazi movement there. And I really benefited from the works of Helen Lööf, who is a Swedish scholar who has she's written the history of the Nazi movement in Sweden, and she's done a lot of deep research into the present day movement. And she discovered that the people who are actually voting for the neo-Nazis in Sweden, the people who are contributing to the campaign funds, are people in, you know, they are working somewhere in you know, governmental offices, you know, they are invisible. They are your bank teller, you know, they are, you know, they run small companies somewhere, you know, they are really people who you would never imagine were harboring these ideas, but they're not only harboring them, they're actively partaking in the moment. And some of them step forward and, you know, go around, you know, half invisible, nurturing these ideas in others. And that is what Gunnar Kampen is doing. He's taken this step, but you know, you can say it's almost laughable how insignificant he is, you know, but he is really doing everything he can, you know, to make this work.
And as we mentioned, I mean, it's full of factual people, real people and facts. So how do you turn your research into a novel? And why is it a novella and not a novel? Could it have been longer? Why did you want to keep it quite compact?
Let's say all books could be longer. and I have chosen to write smaller books in general, you know. Codex 1962 is an aberration.
But it's in three parts, isn't it?
Yeah, it's books written over 25 years, so I have my excuse there. Again, it's about it was about restraining myself and refraining from doing things. You could say that every wannabe Führer wants an epic to be written about him, you know. So I was not going to give Gunnar the epic that he so desired, you know. Yeah. And also it also, I think, also, I think it emphasizes his status as a footnote in history. I just wanted it to be small.
Yeah.
Because I also discovered, it's the same as with the mythology and the pathos. I also discovered that when I started expanding on scenes from the family life or whatever, I would be in the field of, let's say, in the field of the psychological novel. You know, the more information I gave, the more it would have been pretending to understand him. I really don't want to understand him. You know, I want to understand how the surroundings, the society he is in, lives in, makes it possible for him to come into being, more than some psychological process. So if we would have had scenes of his father beating his mother, of Gunnar isolated at school, bullied or whatever, you know, come on. I was definitely not going to write that novel.
And your own name often appears in your novels, and I think it does appear in here. It makes an appearance. So how autobiographical are the stories you tell?
Well, I think they are always autobiographical in a way that I think is quite is quite usual, you know, in novels. You know, I mean, you choose a main character, you choose a story that you relate to, and even working with a character like Gunnar demands, I think, of the author to look for what you have in common with that character. And I mean, no matter how unsavory the character is, you have to find your common points, you know, your shared, your not maybe your shared interests, but elements in you that you can also see in the character. And it was really revealing to me when I started lining out the process of Gunnar and the process of his journey towards founding this tiny Nazi party in Iceland, and my own journey as a teenage surrealist who founded a small surrealist group in Iceland, who started corresponding with people all over the world, who had the dream of a surrealist revolution on this small island. You know, it was really revealing to me, because a part of the attraction of neo-Nazism for young people is its rebelliousness. It is a rebellion against society. It has so many elements in common with the avant-garde. And as we know, the Nazi movement evolved in Europe after the First World War. At the same time, the avant-garde was coming into being. So there are so many elements that they have in common. And I cannot say it was a nice surprise when I discovered this, but it was a surprise. And then I decided to work with it, because it really helped me understand what he was doing. And yeah. And yeah, so it's autobiographical in that way.
Yeah, no, there was a note at the end that I really liked about that connection, an obsession, you know, knowing how to write an obsession.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to know on the translation. I think all the books I've read have been translated by Victoria Cribb.
Yeah.
But how hands-on are you? Do you participate in the translating of your work into English, or do you let her get on with it?
You know, yeah, I think this is maybe I can't remember, is it the 7th book that Vicky has translated of my books. And by now we know each other very well, and I trust her 100%. I think she produces a wonderful text. I always say that my only concern with Vicky is that the book she writes is better than the original, you know. There's always I'm always like a little bit, okay, so could my book have become that good if I had worked a little bit more on it, you know? So, no, she's brilliant. And she of course writes to me if she has any questions, you know. I mean, I tend to work with obscure references or little used words, you know, or whatever. And sometimes Vicky just needs a small explanation of where on earth this is coming from, you know. So I just help her along with those things. And usually those are things that every translator then, I discover that every translator needs to ask about, you know. And again, it also makes me wonder if the Icelandic readers are not getting it either. You know, so. No. So because we work together on
yeah, you've done so much. Yeah,
time, you know, I need to do very little, and I trust her 100%.
Great. And we're nearly out of our time. So what do you have planned next?
So usually I'm working on 2 or 3 different novels, you know. I'm nudging them along, you know, and then one day I discover, okay, this one is ready for writing. And that is what happened with Red Milk. I realized that, you know, it was now or never, just to get it out there and to bring this X-ray of this guy into the world. So I've got three novels. I'm you know, nudging towards the writing stage. And strangely, one of them that I was really hoping to start writing last year when the epidemic hit is a novel that takes place in the 15th century and has as its starting point Black Death. So I thought, okay, I'm on the verge of writing a novel about people who escaped the Black Death in Iceland, but okay, let's put it aside for a little while and see how this epidemic really plays out. So yeah, so I'm always writing, and the next book will probably be a small collection of poetry.
And I mean, I read Moonstone just recently, and I mean, I think it came out in Iceland in 2013, and then in English a few years later. But oh my God, it's so sort of prophetic about what, you know, it's about the Spanish influenza, but it was so sort of, you know, close to what we're going through, what we've been through. It was, you know, extraordinary.
And on top of it all, we now have an eruption, you know, because in Moonstone we also have an eruption.
Yes, yeah.
1918, an epidemic and a volcanic eruption that you could see from Reykjavik, and we are there again.
Yeah.
You know, maybe I should stop writing. I don't know.
Well, it's a terrific book, and so I urge everyone to go out and get a copy. It's a wonderful read. Shun, thank you so much for talking to me. And it's been lovely talking about this book, even though the subject matter is a little bit grim, but a terrific book. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy.